Milí diváci, milé posluchačky, vítám vás u druhého dílu cyklu Cesty emancipace, který pořádá časopis Kontradikce ve spolupráci s Městskou knihovnou v Praze. Název dnešního pořadu je Stop potratům, potraty jsou Černý protest v Polsku. Já se jmenuji Olga Słowik, jsem bohemistka a podílím se mimo jiné na aktivitách Centra genderových studií Filozofické fakulty Univerzity Karlovy. V první části dnešního dílu přednesu úvod, který nám pomůže zasadit černý protest do širšího historického a společensko-politického kontextu. Následně budeme pokračovat rozhovorem s Katarzyną Wężyk, novinářkou, publicistkou a autorkou knihy Aborcja jest, tedy Potraty jsou, která vyšla na začátku března v polském nakladatelství Agora. Na úvod bych ráda vysvětlila, že zde mluvíme o protestech proti dalšímu omezování přístupu k interrupcím v Polsku, tedy v zemi, v níž má nesmírně velký vliv a moc katolická církev. V zemi, v níž společenské napětí neustále roste, mimo jiné kvůli rozmanitým rozhodnutím a změnám, které poslední léta prosazuje vládnoucí strana Právo a spravedlnost. Je tento polský kontext tak výjimečný? Nenajdeme podobné problémy i v jiných zemích? Proč je vůbec nutné bavit se o situaci v Polsku? Co se týče samotných protestů proti dalšímu omezování přístupu k potratům, tak ty se v Polsku konají od podzimu roku 2016, kdy polský sejm, tedy dolní komora polského parlamentu, propustil do druhého čtení občanský návrh zákona, jenž měl zpřísnit podmínky pro umělé přerušení těhotenství. Nová vlna protestů se pak zvedla na podzim loňského roku, kdy Ústavní soud legální potraty radikálně omezil a de facto téměř znemožnil. Nicméně boj za přístup k potratům má v Polsku mnohem delší historii. Po druhé světové válce byla legální interrupce možná pouze v několika případech, a to v situaci ohrožení zdraví ženy, dále v případě podezření, že k oplodnění došlo během znásilnění anebo v důsledku incestu či pohlavního styku s osobou mladší 15 let. Situace se změnila v roce 1956, především díky práci političky a právničky Marie Jaštuk. Od dubna toho roku bylo možné podstoupit interrupci i v případě, kdy se těhotná osoba nacházela v těžké životní situaci. Další zlom přišel o 3 roky později. Od prosince 1959 již těhotné osoby nepotřebovaly lékařské povolení. Stačilo jejich prohlášení, že se nacházejí v obtížné životní situaci. Nicméně již v 70. letech se objevil první pokus toto právo omezit. V roce 1977 nacionalisticko-katolická organizace Polský komitet obrony życia, rodziny i narodu, tedy Polský výbor na ochranu života, rodiny a národa, shromáždila přes 12 000 podpisů pod návrhem na změnu onoho zákona. Ke změnám však tehdy nedošlo. K dalším neúspěšným pokusům došlo v druhé polovině 80. let, kdy katolické kruhy představily návrh zákona o právní ochraně počatého dítěte a také v roce 89, kdy podobný zákon představila skupina 74 poslanců. Nicméně až do roku 1993 byl i nadále v platnosti zákon z druhé poloviny 50. let. Stále však sílilo napětí, které vyvrcholilo právě v roce 1993. Od té doby v Polsku platí, či už spíše platil, zákon, kterému se říká kompromis aborcyjny, tedy interrupční kompromis. Nicméně toto pojmenování pochází z konzervativních kruhů. Doufám, že se k otázce názvosloví a jazyka v tomto konfliktu dostaneme během rozhovoru s Katarzyną Wężyk. Každopádně na základě zákona z roku 1993 zmizela možnost potratu z důvodu obtížné životní situace. Výjimkou pak bylo krátké období v roce 1996, kdy byla schválena novela zákona, která tuto možnost vrátila do hry. Na to nicméně v roce 1997 nesouhlasně reagoval Ústavní soud, který tak potvrdil, že umělé přerušení těhotenství je legální pouze ve 3 zmíněných případech. Interrupce jsou tak v Polsku předmětem sporu již velmi dlouho. Pravicové a katolické kruhy o jejich zákaz nepředřitě usilovaly a usilují. Iniciativa organizace Ordo Juris Stop aborcí, tedy Stop potratům, v roce 2016 vyvolala odpor a spustila masové protesty proti zpřísnění interrupčních pravidel. Návrh zákona, který se tehdy v polském parlamentu dostal do 2. čtení, neumožňoval legální potrat ani v případě, kdy bylo těhotenství následkem znásilnění či incestu, anebo když byl plod závažně poškozen. Návrh navíc počítal i s trestem odnětí svobody nejen pro lékaře či lékařku, která zákrok provede, ale nově také pro samotnou osobu, která tento zákrok podstoupí. Do ulic vyšly tehdy desítky a v dalších týdnech stovky tisíc lidí, a to nejen ve velkých městech. Do protestu, jemuž se podle barvy oblečení protestujících začalo říkat Černý protest, se zapojilo přes 140 měst a obcí. V roce 2016 Sejm tento návrh nakonec nepřijal, nicméně spor další léta pokračoval a obě strany konfliktu nadále představovaly další novely zákona. Situace se stala opět kritickou v říjnu loňského roku. Polský ústavní soud tehdy prozkoumal žádost poslanců několika pravicových stran a rozhodl, že umělé ukončení těhotenství z důvodu vývojových vad plodu porušuje ústavu. Soud přitom argumentoval ústavně zaručeným právem na život a ochranou života. V této souvislosti je potřeba zmínit, že od roku 2015 v Polsku probíhá krize ústavního soudu, jehož složení je mnohými odborníky a odbornicemi považováno za nelegitimní, jelikož nad ním drží kontrolu vládnoucí strana Právo a spravedlnost. Nezávislost polského soudnictví je tak již několik let zpochybňována, a to i na mezinárodní scéně. Toto rozhodnutí ústavního soudu, které bylo zveřejněno letos, 27. ledna, má přitom pro těhotné dalekosáhlé následky. Téměř 98% legálních interrupcí bylo totiž v Polsku prováděno právě z důvodu vývojových vad plodu. Polky tak prakticky ztratily právo na legální a bezpečný potrat. V důsledku tohoto rozhodnutí i předchozích novel zákona jsou tak nuceny podstupovat nebezpečné zákroky v takzvaném interrupčním podzemí, hledat pomoc v zahraničí, anebo rodit a vychovávat dítě navzdory své vůli či možnostem. Pokusy o omezování práva k potratům přivedly stovky tisíc lidí do ulic. Jedná se tak o největší demonstrace v postkomunistické historii Polska, ale také o jedny z největších protestů v Evropě posledních let. Navíc o protesty, které inspirovaly ženy v mnoha dalších, nejen evropských zemích. Můžeme se tedy ptát, jestli to poukazuje na důležitost feministického hnutí. V čem jsou černé protesty tak inspirativní? A mají nějaké slabiny? Mohou být tyto slabiny i zdrojem síly? Protesty známé jako černý protest či stávka žen měly a mají rozmanité formy. Zároveň se mění či liší i požadavky protestujících. Rozmanitost a kreativita jsou vidět také v jazyku samotného protestu. Protestující využívají ku příkladu narážky na klasická díla polské literatury, ale také neváhají sahat po silnějších vulgárních slovech. Jedním z hlavních sloganů se tak stalo slovo vypěrdalať, které můžeme volně přeložit jako jděte do prdele. Právě tímto začnu svůj rozhovor s mojí hostkou Katarzyną Wężyk. So now we are going to continue in English. I would like to welcome our host Katarzyna Wężyk, a journalist and an author of a recently published book, Aborcja jest, which maps not only the current situation in Poland, but also the history of induced abortion in general. It also gives voice to women who decided to end their pregnancy living in a country where it is practically impossible. Hello, Katarzyna.
Hello.
Thank you very much for
and the subtle ad is right behind me.
Okay, thanks a lot for accepting the invitation. In the introduction, I mentioned that the Black protest uses creative language ranging from the citation from canonical Polish authors to swear words. The main slogan of the protest is wypierdalać, that can be translated as fuck off or get the fuck out. So my question is, why did women and other protesters opt for this swear word, and who do they shout it to?
Well, I think when Polish Constitutional Tribunal banned abortion altogether, because banning the third exception, which is exception of fetal deformity, actually bans 97 of legal abortions in Poland. Simple enough is enough wasn't enough. People needed something stronger, I think, to vent their frustration, their anger, their fear, their humiliation. And yeah, wypierdalać, get the fuck out was the main slogan, actually, in the very first day, or first night, actually, right after the Constitutional Tribunal gave this verdict. There was this huge march throughout all Warsaw, and the women's strike, which are the leaders of a protest, were actually carrying this big banner with wypierdalać on it. And the second popular slogan is trzeba było nas nie wkurwiać, which translates to you shouldn't have fucked with us. And the third is jebać PiS, which translates to fuck peace. And as you can probably hear, Polish is a bit more innovative than English when it comes to vulgar words. But apart from, as you said, apart from this very strong and very controversial slogans, because what happened right after the protest started, the critique started. Many so-called experts, usually older and male, felt pressured to explain those poor women that they are behaving in unladylike way, that they should be a bit milder, that being radical is counterproductive. And to their, I think, ongoing surprise, they were also told to leave fast. Because I think what this protests were about they weren't only about this abortion ban, but I think people were just angry on the patriarchy, and those kind of, telling women that they should be more ladylike was embodiment of this patriarchy. But there are also other slogans, and I wrote down some of them to give you a chance to see. So I was concerned in 2016. We ask you nicely to run away quickly. Peace watches porn, hoping for the wedding. Peace likes pizza with pineapple. From now only anal. Wanna decide on people's lives? Buy Sims. It's bad, introverts are here. You're worse than low-cut jeans. Peace, don't you know that you're toxic? Cats can stay. Jarosław Kaczyński has a cat. Rest, get out. May you step on Lego, you dick? My pussy, not Jarosław's. And stop, I'm running out of cardboard. Which, as you see, vary from absurd with references to classical text, references with pop culture, and they were very creative and very fun. And I think they created this kind of, they helped to make the protest more aspirational, because people were almost, competing on whose cardboard is more creative. And they made protests, apart from this very dire circumstances, they made it also fun.
Thank you. So you are talking about the creativity of the language on the side of protesters. I also think that the language is important here in general in the debate on abortion in Poland. So I was also thinking, for example, about what was called kompromis aborcyjny, or in general, there is also one narration is built around the notion of unborn children and their right to live. And the opposite narration stresses out women's rights. So if we use these two languages, basically, is there any possibility for communication?
Well, that is a question, and it's not a question only for Poland, I think. It's a question for everywhere. because those kind of debates and those kind of two totally different sides are crashing pretty much everywhere. And yeah, you're right. When you have one side for which abortion is always a murder from conception on, another side for which abortion ban is an infringement of, those basic human rights, like right to privacy, like right to be free from torture, like right to decide, and such a fundamental change in your life, like having a baby or not. So, it seems that there cannot be any compromise between them. And what the discussion only usually turns to is a shouting match, which also happened in Poland quite often. But I think that pro-choice side has stronger arguments. And the first is that humanity of fetus is and has been for ages disputed. And humanity of women, at least officially, because when you look at abortion ban, I would have some doubts, but at least officially, humanity of a woman is not disputed. So her interests should have priority. And as for fetus, yes, it is a part of the Homo sapiens species, that's for sure, but does it make it a person? And if it does, when does it make it a person? Do we have any concrete line? And if this concrete line can be anywhere, can it be a birth or can it be any other line? And those are ethical questions which have been disputed for years, and still many people have many different ideas. And the second thing is that people who forced abortion ban are actually forcing people who don't agree with them to, they're infringing on their freedom. And those who are against abortion ban, well, if abortion for you is always a sin or it's always something wrong, well, solution is not to do it, right? So, so those are those ethical questions. But I think what would happen is that democracy will decide, as it always does. And now when you look at polls, you see that throughout last 5 years, and we can thank peace for it, we have never had since the 90s so many pro-choice people in Poland. And more polls are willing to give women a choice, at least till this 12th week. You can also see how especially young people really moved to the left, which is, there's some poll quite recently, according to which 1/3 of young Polish people consider themselves left-wing, which is a record-breaking, never happened, and 30% of young women, which is also a record. So even though now we have 2.5 more years of peace government, the opposition parties are already taking this shift to account. Even the civic platform, which for the last 20 years was defending this compromise, which was even back then, even before this verdict, was one of the strictest abortion law in Europe, because it allowed abortion only in 3 exceptions, 3 most traumatic exceptions, which is first, when the woman's life or health was threatened, second, when it was rape or incest, and third, when the fetus was seriously deformed. And as a result, you had 1,000 abortions in Poland per year, and Poland has 38 million people, which doesn't, of course, mean that only 1,000 Polish women had an abortion. So it means that approximately 100 to 150,000 did abortion outside the system, which means either they had pills or they went abroad. So if even civic platform, which was defending this compromise, now it's introducing a law which would allow abortion till 12th week on demand, that means that Polish so-called rational center is moving towards the left.
Mm-hmm. I would like to come back to the question of language once again, because in your book you describe the roots of the linguistic change in talking about abortion. So could you share with us the results of your research in this matter?
Well, during Polish People Republic, during communist years, so before 1989, Polish language, when speaking about abortion, was neutral or medical. It was called skrobanka. even the word abortion wasn't used. It was called termination, and abortion was legal. Abortion was on demand. Because in socialist Poland, contraception wasn't widely available. Abortion was, in fact, one of the most widely used, one of the most often used means to restrict amount of kids in a family. And after 1989, that changed, and that changed pretty much immediately, because the church and right-wing politicians started to use this language, this unborn children, this Holocaust of the unborn, this killing of unborn, pretty much immediately. My employer, which is Gazeta Wyborcza, which is the biggest daily in Poland, and in its very first issue in 1989, we had unborn children on a very first page, opening page, which shows you how this language, how fast and how swift and how overwhelmingly this language started to dominate in Polish public debate. And throughout the first 25 years of after the communist transition, after the democratical transition, yes, this was the language which you could hear everywhere. You could read it in newspapers. You could hear it from Sejm, from Polish Parliament. But it changes. Throughout the last 5 years, it changed a lot, and we can thank Polish women's strikes for it as well.
Thank you. So you mentioned that basically it was Catholics or Catholic Church and right-wing politicians that introduced this new speak or new way of talking about abortion. And I think in general, this conflict is often presented as a conflict of the two opposite sides. So I would like to ask you if this is if it's really that simple. Are there actually two sides of the conflict? And who are the protesters and who is on the opposite side or on the opposite sides?
Well, basically, there are two sides of this conflict. One side are women and their allies who took to the streets or protested from home. And the other side is a peace government with the Catholic Church and ultra-Catholic organizations. And both bishops and those ultra-conservative organizations have been pushing peace to ban abortion for the last 5 years. Ever since it took power, they've seen that now they have a chance to actually do what they always wanted and to ban abortion. And they tried quite a few times. In 2016, they tried to do it via parliament, to change the law, as you do. But the huge it was called Women's Strike or Black Monday, huge protests in major cities, like a few 100,000 people took to the streets wearing black. So the amount of protest actually forced them to move back. But they tried again in 2018, they tried again in 2020 during the pandemic actually, but every single time the reaction of the people told them that it's a bad idea. So in last October, they tried to do it and succeeded doing it in a different way, because if you actually if you do it via parliament, there's accountability. You see who voted for, who voted against. There's some political accountability, and now they moved abortion ban to Constitutional Tribunal, which on paper sounds, respectable, impartial, apolitical, but the problem with Polish Constitutional Tribunal is that it was nominated by the ruling party, and it wasn't autonomic. It wasn't their decisions to actually ban abortion. If they wouldn't do it, if the peace wasn't for it. Abortion was banned by Constitutional Tribunal, and so far the pressure of the street didn't make neither the government nor the tribunal retract this decision. Oh, you also asked who are the protesters, right?
Yes.
So we don't have comprehensive studies yet. I think it's a little bit too early for that. And so I can rely on my own observation, and my own observation are very Warsaw-centric. So they aren't there's that. But from what I've seen on the streets, I've seen very many young people, which is new because people in Poland tend to complain that, young people are not interested in politics. They don't protest against what peace did with the judicial system, for example. And now many young people, especially young women, took to the streets. But we have also like Grandma Collective, or I've seen many, people with toddlers. So it's, whole demographical people from all walks of life and all ages. What is also new, what hasn't happened before, is that it's not only Warsaw and other big cities, the very same few hundred people who always protest. This time, even small towns and really small towns took to the streets. And it really takes much more courage when you live in a small town to protest against basically the church, right? So this kind of gives you hope that it might be a more thorough, more wide, and more lasting change.
So there were basically two big waves of the Black protests, one in 2016 and another one last autumn in 2020. Did something change during these 4 years? Do you see some differences in the protests in 2016 and 2020?
Well, today's protests are more radical, they are bigger, and they are, I think, a little bit more desperate, because back then you could still hope that protest can change something, and now basically this law is set, and I think we have to change for a change of government. So it's going to be more elections than protests to actually make a difference. But back in 2016, I think, when you listen to, because the media very much covered it and they interviewed many protesters, and when you listen to them, much more people back then were still defending this compromise. It was like, compromise is fine, we just don't want any tougher law, we just don't want any abortion ban. And now more and more people, not everyone, but more and more people say, no, enough is enough, we want to be treated seriously, we want to be treated as an adult human beings, we want abortion on demand. And I think this is the main difference.
Thank you. There is also the idea of a referendum on abortion. What do you think about it?
Yeah, Szymon Hołownia, which is one of the new opposition politicians, and former Catholic journalist, is very much for it. But, the problem with referendum is that it's very important who picks the questions. And, you can ask people if they are for giving women freedom to choose if they want to continue pregnancy till 12 weeks. But you can also add, do you want feminists to kill children and make vaccines out of their cells, or, something like that? And the answers in those two questions would be totally different. And if you have peace government, which would be responsible not only for the questions for this referendum, but also counting votes in this referendum, neither women's strike nor me, I totally agree with them. It's referendum nowadays, it's not the best idea.
I see. And you mentioned again law and justice, and it is often said that the Black protests have been used to express objection against the ruling party, both by the protesters and by other political parties. That it wasn't only about the abortion, but also about some other issues connected to the changes and reforms made by law and justice. So how do you see this aspect?
Well, at first, women's strike had just two demands, and one was for the government to leave immediately, let me put it this way, and the second was to reverse this abortion ban, but it didn't happen as well. But now when you look at their website, they have pretty comprehensive and long list of demands, which is not only full reproductive rights, but sex ed, LGBTQ rights, equal pay, secularization. So now it's not only about abortion ban, it's about something more. also, I think those protests are showing that they are encapsulating a social change, but they're not exactly causing it. It's like, I think what we seen in Poland for the last few years is under this very Catholic, very strict, very patriarchal surface, which is our government and the church who supports it. We had bubbling social change, which in October took to the streets. You can see it, for example, in how Poland is secularizing, because, you know, the church kind of established itself in 1990s as this major moral authority, like the only moral authority. Like there's nothing about apart. There are Christian values and no values, and the church is depository of these Christian values, which are all values. But nowadays, not anymore. Like, and the church really worked on it, like really worked on it. Not only through its unhealthy interest in sexuality and reproduction, but also through its greed, through its anti-LGBTQ campaign, through working very hard on abortion ban, but also through recent child abuse scandals, which really rocked the church, and especially because the Polish church, not like because the Irish church or American church, at least try to either apologize or make amends with the victims. And here it's like, no, it's Polish church treats demands to finish pedophilia and to punish priests who are responsible for it as attack on the church and attack on our values, and it's doing basically nothing to deal with it. And the result is that, especially in younger generation, you see the massive run from religion classes, because in Poland we teach religion, not like religion, it's not, we have religion at schools, it's 2 hours per week, and it's not like teaching about different religions, but it's teaching the dogmas of Catholic faith. So now we can see the major run, especially in high schools. Students just don't want to do it anymore. We have this apostasy counting in the internet, and people can, you know, can send their apostasy acts. And when you see, you know, the dates, most of the apostasy acts are from 2020 and 2021. So the role of the church is really changing, and it was about time.
And are there any different tendencies within the Catholic Church itself, or is it that all the people that don't like or are against abortion ban or are frustrated with all the Catholic Church scandals, do they just leave the church, or are there some also other opinions within the Catholic Church itself?
Well, as I'm not a part of Catholic Church since last year, I also did my apostasy. Maybe I'm not the best person to answer these questions. Yeah, there are some reform movements. There are some Catholic feminists in Poland. There used to be a thing called an open church, which never was open to reproductive rights, for example, but it was called the open church. Now, it used to be quite influential in the 90s, but the more, how shall I put it, not to make it very offensive, not fanatical, more conservative, yes, more conservative church took over. And now, I mean, what kind of dialogue could there be if the other side tells you you are wrong and you're attacking me and you should repent? I don't see it.
Okay, you also mentioned that the ban on abortion is part of some bigger changes or policies, and like, for example, anti-LGBT policies or even hate speech against queer people. Also, there are pedophilia scandals. Do you think that this is something very specific to Poland, or can you see somewhere similar tendencies wherever in the world?
Well, there's this pretty big and quite powerful strand of so-called anti-gender ideology. movements. Gender ideology was conceived in the 90s when the word gender was first mentioned in UN documents. I think it was Beijing Conference on Women's Rights, and there was the word gender in this finishing document, and the Catholic Church, who really did what it can to block the resolution, started saying that there's something like gender ideology, which tries to abolish traditional female and male roles, abolish sex altogether, and is destroying families and is destroying the world. And since then, we have many organizations in Europe, but also in US, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, not only Catholic, because those anti-gender organization, anti-gender movement is it's not Muslims and Catholics and Episcopalians and Evangelics and all the kinds of denominations work together, and what is bonding them, it's this patriarchal idea of that the world used to be as it should be, like the women were women, men were men, gay people were in closets, and that they should be left there. There was no abortion, there was no contraception, and families were strong. Man was the head of a family, woman was the neck of a family, and he made all the decision. And this was this was something we should get back to, because European civilization, read white civilization, is gonna be destroyed by all this secular movements, which they considered so-called gender ideology. So yeah, Poland is not singular in this respect. Poland is not. Poland is maybe in Poland it's more visible, because French or German anti-gender movements don't have ear of the prime minister or the most important person in the government, which is not exactly prime minister in Poland. So they are much more influential in Poland, that's for sure. But Poland seems to be somewhat model for those anti-gender movements. They think that the Poland is the battleground nowadays, and if they can win in Poland, they could export this counter-revolution abroad.
I was thinking about the taboo on abortion that was in Poland. It is basically very difficult to open the topic of abortion, for example, on the personal level. So do you think that the Black protests helped to open it up?
Yes and no. Well, definitely yes, but it's not a swift change, and I think it would take time, because abortion stigma in Poland is still very strong. Like in 2016, right after the Black Monday, we have this singer called Natalia Przybysz, and she gave this very honest interview in which she said that yes, she had an abortion, she had 2 kids already, her apartment was, her life was as she wanted it to be, and she couldn't imagine having another child, so she had an abortion. And the reaction was brutal. She heard that she's an egoist, that she should have used contraception, that she murdered her child, that it's not a good reason to have an abortion, because the only good reason to have an abortion is to suffer so much that it's a better solution. But in Poland, you have to earn your abortion, and then you have to apologize for it. Now, not so much, because now it's changing, but throughout the last 30 years, the only good way to tell the world about your abortion is that, I had cancer, it was rape, and the fetus was little deformed, and I had an abortion, but I regret I did it. It was, the only legitimate way, so that you wouldn't receive a lot of hate. But now it changes. We had few abortion coming out. They took place during the protests. They weren't very big and they weren't very covered, and those women not necessarily, they didn't, you know, say my name is this and that and I had abortion. It was like I had an abortion. And we still didn't have, which I think would help, something like a French woman, an American woman, and a German woman had in the 70s, like was this French letter of 333, I think. It was, you know, public intellectuals, actors, singers who wrote this letter. We had an abortion. We are not ashamed of it. So there's high time to change the law. And this letter in the 70s really pushed the abortion legislation in France and in the US. We didn't have anything like that. But I think we're speaking on abortion more and more. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote my book, because half of my book are histories of women who I talked to about abortion. And, you know, I told them at the very beginning of our conversations, like, I'm not judging you. You can tell me whatever you like. I respect you. And I also don't have full names, and some women change their names, but, you know, they are speaking about on this so-called ordinary abortion, this abortion which is so stigmatized, this abortion because, you know, because it was a Tinder date, because she had enough kids already, because she was in precarious economic situation, because, you know, she wanted to end her relationship, or because she was moving, you know, all the reasons that most of women, most of people cite the reasons of abortion. And we didn't talk about it in Poland at all because it was so stigmatized. So, you know, I really sincerely do hope that our conversation on abortion is gonna finally change, because if we don't humanize this ordinary abortion, and if we don't change the language, you know, nothing is gonna change. It's still, it's because even, you know, when you look at this opposition party, the center-right party, who actually changed its stance on abortion, and now it introduced a law which would allow Polish women to terminate pregnancy on demand till 12 weeks. You know, well, fine, great, that's a progress, but on a condition that, you know, this woman is going to talk to a doctor and a psychiatrist. So this woman would have to, you know, justify her reasons to the authority, preferably male authority, I guess. But, you know, but she can have this abortion. It's like, it's still mistrusting women. It's still considering women little girls who, you know, who have to justify their decisions to some higher authority. Until we change this attitude towards abortion, I don't think we can, you know, anything can much change in Poland. And sadly, it won't be done like that. It takes time.
Yeah, that's why I think the stories are very important. So thanks a lot for writing this book and giving voice to all those women. And now I have a final question considering the Black protests. So what do you think can be the role and significance of the Polish protests and strikes for women's and queer people rights in other countries and on other continents?
That's a tough question. Well, as for content of Europe, I think, you know, they don't need any Polish guidance, because they have more rights than Polish women do. So it's like we can look up to them, not they look up to us so far. And queer rights, of course, because anti-LGBT campaign in Poland undertook by both the government and the church is quite horrible. It really is. So yeah, it is us, it's Poland who needs to aspire to more civilized standards in this aspect, not other countries to polish. But from what I know, for example, when the Black protest started 5 years ago, women's strike were in touch in, for example, Argentinian Move, and they were exchanging experiences and know-how and knowledge. And, you know, there's Argentinians, after many years of battling, finally last year managed to liberalize abortion law. So, you know, I hope it works both ways. Maybe Polish organizers and activists, you know, can use their experiences to introduce in Poland this kind of liberalization of law. And, you know, if protest can be an example, I think it can be an example of fortitude and example of, how shall I put it so it wouldn't sound too much, you know, big letters. And well, the protest took place in a pandemic, in, you know, the second wave of pandemic was raging. We have approximately 25,000 new COVID cases daily. And, and this is a deadly disease, right? So if you have 100,000 people who take to the streets, even though it poses serious threat to their health and even life, you can see the determination and the sacrifice of those people. And if something gives me hope for, more women's friendly future in Poland, it's that.
Okay, thank you very much. My host was Katarzyna Wężyk. Thank you very much for sharing with us your knowledge and opinions, and hopefully the situation will change.
Thank you for having me. That was a pleasure.